Hello, good morning, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video we're going to be painting a spring wreath. Now I'm going to be painting a little bit more of a muted spring wreath, but you are welcome to change the colors to whatever you want to paint. This wreath design is perfect for spring, for Easter, for Mother's Day. It's really a versatile wreath. So to start out, I'm just going to water down some paint. I want it to be really light, so I'm using a lot of water and just a little bit of paint. I'm just using whatever's on my palette. It doesn't really matter, but this is just going to be our guideline so that we know where to paint our leaves and our flowers. And you want it to be light enough that you can see it, but you don't necessarily have to have it light enough that everyone can see it. It's just going to be covered up in a moment anyway, so you may not even be able to see mine, but that's okay. And I've already softened up my paints. I'm picking up Brilliant Pink by Holbein. And this is English Red Earth from Daniel Smith. If you've softened your paints already, it's really easy to pick up more color. So this pink and then that muted red are going to make a really nice color. I want it to be really soft, so that's why I added quite a bit of water to it. Okay, and now we're going to paint our first rose. And I'm going to paint a little bit of a cluster right in here. And because we're painting in a wreath, we want this to be a little bit smaller than you might normally paint. I'm using my size 10 round brush. I could even go down to an 8 or a 6 for the size that we're painting, but I like using my size 10. It really just depends on what you're comfortable with. Okay, there's our first rose. And our second one, I'm going to make it a little bit more on the pink side. Still muted, still that same color, I've just added a little more pink. And we're just going to paint that directly next to this first one. Alright, and one more. I'm going to use Shell Pink. It's an even softer pink, but mix it into what I've already got going here. And I'm going to paint that right here, also along the bottom. Next, what we want to do is, when you're painting in layers, you want to start with the lightest color and then work your way to the darkest color. So what I'm going to do is, I've got a green that I've mixed already. I used sap green, a little bit of yellow ochre, and then a little bit of that English red earth, and a lot of water. And now I'm just going to fill in my wreath with some leaves. They're going to be really soft because this is our bottom layer. And you want to make sure that they're all kind of facing the same direction. And what I mean by that is they're all pointing the same way around my circle. If they suddenly change directions, it's harder to make it look cohesive. So they're all kind of angled out, but they're all starting at that circle point. Alright, now we've got that first layer of leaves down. So now I'm going to mix a slightly darker color using the same kind of formula. So I've got sap green, or sorry, this is undersea green, but I'm also going to mix in some sap green. And I want it to be a little bit more muted. I don't want it quite as vibrant, so I'm going to add in a little more of that English red earth. And then a tiny bit of this cobalt turquoise. I love mixing this color into my green. I just think it makes it so pretty. Okay, that's nice. So now I'm going to go back through and I'm just going to add a different kind of greenery to my wreath. And they're just going to be these little sprigs. So I'm painting a stem and then these smaller leaves back toward the stem. And I'm just going to kind of skip around a little bit. But the reason that I paint the same element all at the same time is so that I can pay attention to color balance. And I really have more control over where things are. If I add too much, then it's harder to go back and add in that, element in a different color or the same color. So that's why I like to just kind of dance around my painting and add the same color in all at once. It also helps so that I don't have to remix anything if I want everything to match really well. This is all kind of blending together, but I'm not too worried about that because we're just going to add more layers and it's not even going to matter. Alright, and now we're just going to keep going around. This time I'm going to add in some little berries. So because it's a spring wreath, I'm going to mix kind of a muted yellow. And this is isoindolin yellow. This is a warm yellow. And then this is cadmium yellow medium hue. And you can see how bright and vibrant that is. I'm going to tone it down with some blue and some purple. So this is cobalt violet. Cobalt violet is a little bit too transparent, so I'm actually going to use this quinacridone purple or quinacridone violet. I can't remember off the top of my head. But if you want to see all the colors that are on my palette, you can always check out my Amazon store. And I have all the colors listed there. And then a little bit of this blue. I'm just going to test a little sample right here. And it's almost like a gold color. I want it to be a little more bright. I don't normally test out my colors like this, but I really want this to look nice. So I'm adding a little bit of water to soften that up. and that looks about right to me. So now I'm going to go through and add just some little berries. Now, if you have any questions while we're painting, feel free to leave them in the comments below. And then once I'm finished with this painting, I'll go back and answer your questions. This yellow is kind of taken over, but that's all right. Okay, now I'm going to wait just a moment for this to dry over here. It looks like these over here, these leaves are dry. So I'll just go slow. But I want to add a little bit of a darker color, so I'm going to go back in. That's a lot of cobalt turquoise. But I have perylene green and cobalt turquoise mixed with a little bit of Payne's gray, which is more like a navy blue. And this is just going to add some contrast. And I'm just going to go in and add some more leaves. Let's see, I want to add the stems next before I add any more greenery, just so I can make sure that everything is flowing. So now I'm going to go back and kind of add more depth to my roses. Let's see, come up here. This is alizarin crimson, and then I'm going to add in some of that English red earth. So it's a much darker color than what I had before, but I'll soften that up with a little bit of water and then paint right over the top of this. Okay, now for my stems, I'm using, this is raw umber violet. It's one of my favorite browns because it has a little hint of purple in it, and it just has a really, really nice tone to it. I'm going to add my stems using that. And I'm being careful not to touch my berries at all. There's like a little tiny gap, and I do that just so that the yellow can stay looking yellow and it's not going to have any brown bleeds in it. Now if your paint is all the way dry, oops, I accidentally touched that one. That's what will happen if your paint isn't dry. But if it is all the way dry, you don't need to worry about having a little gap. You can just paint right over the top and you won't have that bleeding. But because my berries were still wet, just being really careful. Okay, now same color, raw umber violet. I'm just going to add a little bit of this green into it. And I see that we have some questions. I will answer those in just a moment. So not really leaves, more like little sprigs. Alright, now that we've got those in place, we can go back in and fill in any spots that we want to. And I'm going to do, I really like this cobalt turquoise, but I want it to be a little bit softer. So I'm just adding more water to it. Alright, here we go. And I want a different texture than what I've got going on here, so I'm just going to do some little lines to look like a little pine sprig or something like that. They're almost like little scribbles. Alright, and I think for the most part the wreath is finished. I want to add just a little bit of detail here throughout my leaves, but other than that I think it's done. I just, if you wanted to add a little sentiment in the center, you could, but if you do, I would definitely wait until your paint is all the way dry. I'm going to answer questions, but while I'm thinking about it, will you just give this video a thumbs up if you are enjoying this wreath? Okay, now I'm going to answer some questions here. Let's see. Mel asks, any tips on what direction to point the leaves? And it doesn't really matter. I would just choose a direction and stick to it. Now right here I kind of switched directions. I have some leaves coming up this way, but then I have all of these pointing around the other direction. What's making this work is that they all just seamlessly blend with these two leaves right here. So while I have this going up from this rose and these going around from this rose, it just kind of matches up here. If you had like, I don't know, some weird curving out or something and it just wasn't blending very well, that's when you would have kind of an issue. Oh, so she says it's easier in a wreath, but in a bouquet arrangement, I struggle with it. So I have a lot of tips for that in another video that I will link down below. It's how to add leaves to your composition, I believe. I can leave a link down below. But if you also want more tips than in that video, my new composition course is going live today. So I'll also leave a link to that. And in that video, or sorry, in that course, we go over color, color mixing, color balance. We go over overlapping flowers, how to know where to add in leaves, and then I go over go-to compositions so that you can practice on those and really get the hang of painting your own compositions. It's a really, really great course. And I'm not just saying that because I made it. It's what I wish I would have had when I first started out. Okay, Heather asks, oh, she says, I like how the roses are at an angle. Thank you. I do too. What brand paints are you using? So there are a variety of different paint brands. I'm using Holbein, Daniel Smith, Winsor & Newton, M-Gram. I think those are the main ones. But if you go to my Amazon store, there's a section called What's on my palette, and that has all of the colors listed there, all the links to my paint. Okay, if there are no more questions, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. But please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I post weekly tutorials just like this, and they're really great to follow along, especially if you don't have time to paint and you want to paint but you don't know what to paint. These are great to follow along with. Also, be sure to check out my composition course, and if you're not quite ready for composition, I also have the Intro to Watercolor Flowers and Leaves course, and you'll be able to learn how to paint over 30 different flowers and leaves in real time with detailed explanation of what I'm doing. Yasmin asks, what brand paints do you like most and why? My favorite is Daniel Smith. I feel like they're really rich paint. They're really easy to re-wet and to use. You pick up a lot of pigment, so you're not like really working your brush to pick up paint. They're my favorite. Also in my Amazon store, if you go to beginner, like suggestions for beginners, I think is what it's called, I have this paint set is in there. It's the Daniel Smith Watercolor Essentials set. If you want to know how to mix all of these colors, I have a video on how I created a whole color wheel of colors using just these 6 paints. And I think they're around $20 on Amazon, so they're really affordable. They're the professional grade, so you're not spending that much more on these than you would, like, I don't know, a cheap set, and they're going to be way higher quality. So I definitely recommend those if you're just starting out. Okay, I'm going to hang out for like 30 more seconds, and I know there's a little bit of a delay, so I just want to give you time if you have another question. I'll move this out of the way, just in case. Okay, thanks for watching. I will leave those 2 videos that I mentioned in the description box below, and I'll also leave links to my courses, so be sure to check those out.